Can Legendary Pictures do for Gojira what it did for Batman? You're watching Beyond the Triller's review of Godzilla.
The arrogance of man is thinking nature is in our control. And not the other way around.
Spider-Man and X-Men might have come first, but it was The Dark Knight that changed the game when it comes to superhero movies. Christopher Nolan's ultra-realistic approach with a heavy dose of reverence propelled the genre not just to new heights at the box office, but respect from critics and the industry alike. The Dark Knight was the first superhero movie to cross the 500 million mark domestically, the first superhero movie to join the $1 billion club, and not only earned a Best Supporting Actor Oscar for Heath Ledger, but was widely believed to have been robbed of a Best Picture and Best Director nomination. Yes, much like Radiation turned Godzilla into the king of monsters, Nolan and Legendary Pictures turned The Dark Knight into a prestige blockbuster. Now, Legendary is teaming up with another up-and-coming British director, Gareth Edwards, to see if they can apply the same strategy to Godzilla. But while Batman was an American icon reimagined for an American audience, Godzilla is a Japanese icon reimagined for an American audience. Can the two vastly different cultures be reconciled? Toho Studios certainly think so, as the Japanese studio has willingly handed over its creation to Legendary Pictures, with the hope their local franchise can be turned into a global one. Now, to be fair, Godzilla already has fans the world over, but it's a cult fan base. Toho and Legendary have their eye on mainstream success. But again, the cultural transition here is their biggest roadblock. For instance, the action has been moved primarily from Japan to the American West Coast. Plus, it features only one lead Asian role, while the rest of the cast is Caucasian. Furthermore, Godzilla was initially created in response to the nuclear bombings of Japan in World War II. Even today with Fukushima, nuclear power and its devastating effects are an integral part of Japanese culture. In comparison, with the exception of Russia, the rest of the world has a far more removed relationship with nuclear power. Now, back to superheroes. Interestingly, that comes into play here as well. Godzilla fans have long enjoyed watching their hero battle other monsters or team up with them, and Godzilla is set to do the same here. However, as you might have noticed, Legendary has kept that part of the film very hush-hush, only recently confirming it with the release of the film's Asian trailer. So can Legendary Pictures make an ultra-realistic Godzilla film that appeals to mainstream moviegoers and still pleases the cult fan base, all while satisfying both Eastern and Western tastes? Or was The Dark Knight lightning in a bottle? Somebody has been studying their Spielberg, but unfortunately in Spielberg 101, Gareth Edwards gets a B-. That's because while he absolutely nails the visuals, he fails in terms of story and heart, which ultimately makes Gareth Edwards Godzilla's strongest and weakest asset. Now, I'll elaborate on that in a moment, but first off, as many of you know, going into Godzilla, I had serious concerns about ethnic diversity in terms of the cast, cultural sensitivity, in particular to Japan, where Godzilla originated, and I do think that the Japanese scenes, the scenes that take place in Japan, unfortunately with mostly Caucasian actors, were the strongest. And I think because they really reference the history of Godzilla. But then also I was concerned that this movie wouldn't address the deeper meaning behind the whole creation of Godzilla, and that's with the dangers of nuclear power, etc. But I have to say, upon seeing the film, all of that is moot, because Godzilla, this version, happens to be an A-level treatment of a very standard B-level monster movie. So this film is just basically so far away from being ready to discuss such sophisticated topics and deal with them that it's not worth mentioning. All right, so back to Gareth Edwards and why he works and why he doesn't. I think that, as I said, his Spielberg visuals are perfect. In fact, I think he comes as close as anyone I've seen to duplicating a lot of what makes Spielberg's films work, again, on the visual level. And I think that he's really raised the bar for Christopher Nolan. Interesting, we talked about him probably borrowing a couple pages from Nolan's book for this film, because there is a little bit of the gritty realism that you've seen in like Nolan's Batman trilogy, as I referenced in the open here. So I think you have a lot of the visual style of what I think Nolan will probably be wanting to accomplish with Interstellar. So I think Gareth Edwards has raised the bar very high here. But the reason I think that he fails in some reason, to some degree, is because while he is very good at copying Spielberg's visual style, I think he doesn't understand why certain elements are there. For instance, Spielberg always has kids in his movies, but the kids in Spielberg movies have, their character in the movie. They have story arcs, they have lots of lines, whereas here the kids are just more or less, oh hey, Spielberg has lots of kids, throw in some kids into the movie. That's basically kind of the way they are utilized. And then also Spielberg is famous for reaction shots. What's happening is so amazing, and you can tell because look at the way these people are reacting in the movie. But the problem here in Godzilla is that it's almost all reaction shots. Those kids, they spend most of the time reacting. And I think Ken Watanabe in particular is a character who suffers from just mostly being a spectator. For someone who's supposed to be an expert in Godzilla, etc., I don't want to give anything away, he really has very little to contribute. He mostly is just there as a witness. And I guess you could say maybe there's some biblical aspects to that, but I think that the movie maybe wanted to go there, but it just doesn't succeed. As for the human characters overall, none of them are that well developed, and I think that's partially because there are too many of them. There were a lot of characters here where I was like, you don't need this character, cut that person out, you can combine these two characters. There's a spoiler I don't want to give away. I'm going to do a spoiler review, so you can find out how I feel about this movie in depth by watching that, and there'll be a link at the end of this video to check that out. But the real stars here are the monsters anyway, the Muto. And I thought that they were really, not only really well designed, but they were incredibly well realized. I thought the Muto looked amazing. I loved their look. I thought they were very cool. There were some awkward moments with the Muto. Let's just say some of the Muto needed some pants. And I thought they were really cool though, and I thought they seemed dangerous and exciting, and something I hadn't seen before, but yet somewhat familiar to what I've seen of old pictures of Godzilla films. It was really, I just really was in love with these monsters. I thought they were phenomenal. And you know who else I loved? Godzilla. I fell in love with this guy. He was adorable. Again, I can't give away too much about the details about Godzilla, but I thought he or she, they didn't really specify here. I know there's been some debate in real life, but Godzilla was just, I thought, just actually so cute, and you really kind of could connect with Godzilla, and I think that was intentional, and it was successful to that degree. And Godzilla, I have to say, has some amazing moments in this movie. Just spectacular. So should you go and see this film? Because as I've said, it seems to have a lot of high points and low points. Now, I would say if you are into Godzilla, comics, anime, or anything that is covered at San Diego Comic-Con, you should definitely see this movie because there's enough good stuff, there's enough standout scenes that makes it worth your time in the theater because I think you're going to want to see it. However, if you're not into those things, as were the people that I went to see this movie, you might want to consider maybe skipping it or seeing it as a rental. Because I have to say, at the very least, make sure you're well rested. Because the people I was with, when they weren't asleep, they just could not stay awake. And they were trying very hard. And I had to keep waking them up during the movie, being like, okay, I know you don't love this, but you're not going to want to miss this scene. This is amazing. I had to wake them up so they could see the Godzilla reveal. Thank goodness it was telegraphed so that I could have them be ready to watch it. But also, they had a problem figuring out the story because basically there's a general timeline that's been constructed that's pretty simplistic. That's why I'm saying it's like your standard B-level monster movie. When you get right down to it, this is a very simple story, but then they kind of like smash it and put different pieces in different parts of the globe. They tell it out of order to some degree, and also a lot of it doesn't happen on screen. You have to have characters tell you what's happened and not particularly exciting sequences. So my friends just could not follow this movie. And then when I explained it to them afterwards, they were like, they challenged me. They were like, can you even tell me what happened in that movie? And I was like, I can. And they were like, oh, well, that actually sounds pretty good. I wish that had been more clear in the film. Finally, I would also like to give a shout out to the opening credit sequence. Very well done. Almost not as good as Watchmen, but I think certainly, in the same category as a movie that's really done a lot with its opening credit sequence to make it at least very interesting and really set the stage and set the tone for the film. So that's my review of Godzilla. Again, if you want my spoiler review, we'll have far more detail because we can discuss things that will give away major plot points in the film, and we can discuss some of the things that I think in the film sadly didn't make sense, because beyond even not being able to understand it from a comic book perspective, a lot of the motivations and the science behind it just were too muddled that the comic book fan in us can say, okay, I get it, I accept it, fine, but I think your regular moviegoer, your mainstream moviegoer goes, but that doesn't make any sense. That's another hurdle for this film. But again, I suggest if you're at all into this kind of stuff, go see it, because there's stuff worth seeing. All right, that's my review. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you'll go check out my spoiler review right now.